The rain tapped gently against the tall glass windows of the Miller mansion, a place so large and quiet that every sound seemed to echo through its marble halls. Inside, 12-year-old Ethan Miller sat in his wheelchair, staring out into the gray afternoon, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. He had never walked a single step in his life, his legs weak since birth. But what hurt more than his condition was the emptiness that filled his days. His father, Thomas Miller, was one of the most successful businessmen in the city. Always traveling, always busy, and rarely home. His mother had passed away when Ethan was only 3, leaving behind only a faint memory of her soft voice and warm hands. The mansion was filled with servants who cleaned, cooked, and spoke to him politely, but never really talked to him, never looked at him as more than the boss's son in the chair. That morning had started like any other breakfast in the sunroom, homework with the tutor, and then hours of silence, while the rain made the world outside feel even further away. But just after lunch, the front door opened, and a new sound filled the air, the soft shuffle of footsteps, and the low hum of a woman's voice singing a tune that didn't seem to belong to the cold, polished house. She appeared in the doorway of the living room, a middle-aged black woman with warm brown eyes, a gentle smile, and a maid's uniform that looked freshly pressed. "Hello there," she said, her voice carrying a brightness that made Ethan turn his head. "My name's Rosa." Ethan nodded politely, not used to strangers speaking to him, as if they were meeting an ordinary boy. Most adults crouched down, spoke slowly, or avoided his gaze entirely, but Rosa looked straight at him with curiosity and kindness. She began dusting the shelves, moving with an ease that made the room feel softer somehow. While she worked, she hummed and talked as though the silence between them was nothing at all. She told him about the storm outside, how the rain made the air smell fresh, how the garden looked like it was drinking in the water. At first, Ethan only listened, unsure how to respond. But then she asked him a question no one had in a long time. "What do you like to do when it rains?" Ethan hesitated, then admitted he liked to imagine running through puddles and kicking the water up into the air, even though he had never done it. For a moment, Rosa stopped dusting and looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled and said, "You've got a good imagination, Ethan. Sometimes that's where everything starts." As the hours passed, Ethan found himself watching her move around the room, noticing how she treated his things with care, not because they were expensive, but because they were his. She didn't rush, didn't act like she had better places to be. When she spoke, her words seemed to fill the space with warmth, as if the rain outside was just a soft background to her presence. Before leaving that day, Rosa leaned down and whispered, "I think this house has been too quiet for too long." Ethan didn't know why, but those words stayed with him long after she was gone. That night, he couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain had faded, replaced by the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. And still, his mind wandered back to her voice and the way she had looked at him, not as if he were fragile, not as if he were broken, but as if he were whole. Something inside him shifted, something small but undeniable. He didn't know what it meant, but he had the strange feeling that Rosa's arrival was not just another change in staff. There was something about her, something that made the air feel different, as if she had brought with her a secret, one that could change everything. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan found himself waiting for tomorrow. The next morning, the sun pushed through the clouds, scattering golden light across the Miller mansion. And for the first time in months, Ethan found himself awake before his alarm. He waited, pretending to focus on his breakfast, but his ears strained for the sound he had heard yesterday, the soft humming, the measured footsteps, the warmth that seemed to move ahead of Rosa like an invisible glow. When she finally appeared, carrying a tray of freshly folded linens, she smiled at him in a way that made him feel as though she had been looking forward to seeing him too. "Good morning, Ethan," she said cheerfully, her voice cutting through the stillness like sunlight through shadow. He mumbled a greeting, unsure why his chest felt lighter just from hearing her voice. As she worked, Rosa began talking again, not about chores or rules, but about little things. The way the garden squirrels chased each other, the funny shape of the clouds drifting overhead, the smell of the cinnamon rolls baking in the kitchen. Without realizing it, Ethan began to answer her, his replies growing longer as the minutes passed. Later, while she was polishing the piano in the living room, she asked if he could play, and he admitted he had taken lessons when he was younger, but stopped after his mother passed. Rosa didn't say "I'm sorry," like most people did. Instead, she said, "Well, maybe one day you'll show me what you remember," and went back to polishing, leaving him curious about why her words didn't feel heavy like pity. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. Rosa would appear in whatever room Ethan happened to be in, and somehow, without forcing conversation, she pulled him into it. She asked about his favorite books, what movies made him laugh, and which places he wanted to see if he could travel anywhere. When he told her he wanted to see the ocean, she asked him to describe it, and listened with such focus that he could almost hear the waves in the silence between her nods. Then one rainy afternoon, while picking up toys from the carpet, Rosa noticed Ethan staring at his legs, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. "What are you thinking about?" she asked gently. Embarrassed, he shrugged and said, "Nothing." But Rosa didn't look away. "You were trying to move them, weren't you?" Ethan froze, unsure how she could tell. The doctors had always said it was impossible, and even his father told him not to hope for something that could never happen. Yet Rosa's expression didn't carry disbelief. It carried curiosity, almost as if she were calculating something. In her mind, "Maybe you can't walk now," she said slowly, "but have you ever tried? Just a little, every day." Ethan laughed bitterly, but she didn't smile. "I'm not talking about magic, Ethan. I'm talking about effort. Sometimes, what the world calls impossible is just something no one has tried long enough." Her words stayed in his mind long after she left the room. And that night, lying in bed, Ethan found himself flexing his toes under the blanket, just to see if anything happened. The next day, Rosa was waiting in the garden when he wheeled himself outside. "Want to play a game?" she asked, holding up a small ball. He frowned, but agreed, and she gently tossed it toward him. As he caught it, she said, "Now throw it back without moving your arms, just use your legs to push the chair forward." Ethan stared at her like she was joking, but when she didn't laugh, he tried. The movement was tiny, almost invisible, but Rosa's eyes lit up. "That's something," she whispered, as if she had just witnessed a rare event. From that moment on, a quiet, secret bond formed between them. She began slipping little challenges into their days, reaching for objects slightly out of his usual range, pushing himself forward during games, and stretching his legs while they talked so casually that anyone watching would think nothing unusual was happening. The progress was almost invisible, but Ethan could feel something shifting inside him, not just in his body, but in his heart. Still, neither of them told his father. It wasn't time. Not yet. Rosa had a look in her eyes that told Ethan she had a plan, one he didn't fully understand, but he trusted her more than he had trusted anyone in years. Somewhere deep inside, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the impossible wasn't as far away as everyone said. Over the next few weeks, Rosa's presence in the mansion became as natural as the ticking of the old grandfather clock. But beneath the quiet routine, something deliberate was happening, something only she and Ethan knew. Each morning, after finishing her chores, Rosa would find a way to be near Ethan, either in the garden, the library, or the sunlit hallway where the air felt warmer. She never called it therapy, never made it feel like work. Instead, she wrapped their secret effort inside games, challenges, and casual moments that seemed harmless to anyone watching. She'd drop a pencil just far enough that Ethan had to lean forward and shift his weight to pick it up. Or she'd ask him to help water the plants, placing the watering can on a low bench so he had to stretch his legs just slightly to reach it. At first, the movements were so small that Ethan doubted they mattered, but Rosa noticed every flicker, every twitch, every tiny victory, and she celebrated them in ways that made him feel like he was winning something important. "See," she'd whisper with a wink. "The body listens when you give it a reason." Some days were harder. His legs felt heavy, and frustration burned in his chest, but Rosa never let him give up. She told him stories of people who had climbed mountains after everyone said they couldn't. And though he didn't know if those stories were true, the way she told them made him believe they could be. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, while the late summer sun painted the flowers gold, Rosa leaned closer and said, "I have an idea, but it's going to take time. And you can't tell anyone, not even your father." Ethan frowned, wondering why his father couldn't know, but Rosa explained softly, "Sometimes people mean well, but their fear can hold you back. Your father loves you, but he's been told all his life that walking isn't possible for you. If he hears about this too soon, he might stop us before we've even started." Ethan thought about it, and though the secrecy made his stomach twist, he agreed. And so, the plan began to grow. Every day, Rosa added a little more to their quiet exercises, longer stretches, pushing his chair a few feet without using his hands, trying to stand while holding onto the edge of the table for just a second or two. She marked each success not with a big fuss, but with a quiet smile and a nod, as if to say, "We're getting closer." Sometimes Ethan would catch her looking at him with a strange mix of pride and determination, like someone who had already seen the ending of a story and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. The mansion staff went about their duties, never guessing what was happening in the quiet corners of the house. And Thomas Miller remained buried in his work, traveling often and returning late, unaware that his son's world was slowly shifting. But as the weeks turned into months, Ethan could feel the change not just in his legs, but in his heart. For the first time, he woke each day with purpose, with the thought that maybe tomorrow he'd do something he couldn't do today. Yet, deep down, he also knew that if anyone found out too soon, it could all be over. And that thought, as much as it frightened him, only made the secret they shared with Rosa feel more precious. Somewhere in the quiet halls of the mansion, a boy who had never walked was taking the first invisible steps toward a future no one dared to imagine. And the only person who believed in that future as fiercely as he did was the woman who had walked into his life with nothing but kindness, patience, and a plan no one else could see. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when everything changed. The kind of day when the golden leaves outside seemed to whisper secrets as they fell. And Ethan felt stronger than he had in years. Rosa had decided today was the day to push the boundaries, suggesting they try something they had never done before, standing for more than a few seconds without holding on to anything. Ethan's heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement as he gripped the edge of the sturdy dining table, feeling Rosa's steady hands on his shoulders. "Just a little more weight on your legs," she encouraged softly, her voice calm but her eyes sharp with focus. Inch by inch, Ethan straightened his back, his legs trembling like thin branches in the wind. Yet holding him, he could feel the ground beneath his feet in a way that made his chest swell with hope. And for one long, impossible moment, he wasn't in the chair, he was standing, breathing hard, staring straight ahead. That was when the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. The door swung open, and there stood Thomas Miller, briefcase in hand. Frozen in place, as if the scene before him didn't make sense. His eyes darted from Ethan's shaking legs to Rosa's hands, and instead of joy, his face darkened with alarm. "What is going on here?" His voice was sharp, almost cold, cutting through the air. Ethan's balance wavered, and Rosa quickly eased him back into the chair, her expression calm but guarded. "We were just," she began, but Thomas raised a hand to silence her. "You were just risking my son's safety. Do you have any idea what could happen if he falls? If he gets hurt?" The warmth in the room drained away, replaced by a heavy silence. Ethan tried to speak, to explain, but his father's words came fast, filled with worry disguised as anger. "The doctors said this is impossible. Ethan, I won't have you chasing something that will only end in pain." Rosa met his gaze without flinching. "With respect, sir, sometimes doctors are wrong. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind refuses to see." But Thomas's jaw tightened, and his voice dropped low. "I will not have you experimenting on my son. Pack your things. You're done here." Ethan felt the words hit him like a blow. "No, Dad. You don't understand, she's helping me. I'm getting stronger." But Thomas didn't look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Rosa, as if ending her presence was the only way to end this hope he saw as dangerous. Rosa's face softened as she knelt in front of Ethan, her hands resting gently on the arms of his chair. "Don't stop, Ethan," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the tension. "You've already started your journey. Remember that." And then she stood, turning toward the door without another word, her steps steady even as the mansion seemed to grow colder with every one she took. Thomas set his briefcase down with a sigh, rubbing his forehead as if trying to erase the image of what he had seen. "I know you think she's helping," he said finally, "but hope like this, it can break you." Ethan didn't answer. He simply stared at the door Rosa had walked through, feeling the silence press down on him like the heaviest weight he had ever known. That night, the mansion felt emptier than it ever had, the walls echoing with the absence of the one person who had believed without hesitation. Yet deep inside, beneath the hurt and the anger, a spark remained, a stubborn ember that refused to go out. The days after Rosa's departure were heavy and silent, each one stretching longer than the last. And though Thomas tried to fill the emptiness with tutors, therapists, and new activities, nothing felt the same. Ethan went through the motions, but late at night, when the house was still, he replayed Rosa's words in his mind. "Don't stop. You've already started your journey." And in the quiet of his room, away from watchful eyes, he continued the exercises they had done together. At first, progress was painfully slow. His legs trembled under the smallest strain, and there were nights he fell asleep with frustration burning in his chest. But the ember Rosa had lit inside him refused to die. He pushed himself a little further, each day, using the edge of his bed or the arm of a chair to steady himself, holding his balance for seconds at a time, then longer, until one morning he managed to take a single, shaky step before collapsing onto the mattress with both triumph and exhaustion. Weeks passed, and the chill of winter began to fade, replaced by the soft promise of spring. On a clear morning, Thomas returned from a business trip and found Ethan in the garden, the wheelchair beside him but empty, his hands gripping the back of a bench as he stood upright, his legs shaking but holding. Thomas froze, disbelief etched across his face. "Ethan, how?" But his son didn't answer. Instead, he took one step forward, then another, slow and uneven, but real, until he stood in front of his father, breathing hard yet smiling with a pride that said everything. Thomas's eyes glistened, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You did this." Ethan nodded. "We did, Rosa and I." Without hesitation, Thomas pulled out his phone and made a call. That afternoon, the front gates of the mansion opened, and Rosa stepped inside, her expression a mixture of surprise and hope. When she saw Ethan standing at the far end of the garden, she stopped in her tracks, covering her mouth with trembling hands. He began walking toward her, each step more steady than the last, the sunlight catching the tears in both their eyes. When he reached her, she knelt and hugged him tightly, and he whispered, "You didn't just teach me to walk, you taught me to live." Thomas, watching from a few steps away, understood in that moment that the greatest wealth he had ever gained wasn't in his bank account but in seeing his son free from the limits the world had placed on him. From that day on, the mansion was no longer just a place of polished marble and quiet halls. It was filled with laughter, movement, and the unshakable proof that miracles aren't always sudden. Sometimes they are built slowly, step by step, by someone who refuses to stop believing. And as Rosa and Ethan walked side by side through the blooming garden, it was clear to everyone who saw them that the impossible had been made possible, not by chance, but by love, patience, and the courage to keep going when the world says you can't.